Welcome to the Customer TV. I'm Rafer Weigel.
And I'm Mike Giambattista. Rafer, let's get right to the headlines.
With companies in a more fragile state after COVID, there's a growing trend among businesses. Create a MarTech platform that has empathy for customers and employees. One article says there is a need now to speak human through artificial intelligence. So, Mike, it's interesting. We talk more and more about creating a better customer experience. It seems like the COVID reset is almost like a return to common sense.
This is all about human values, human expectations, human touch, dealing with customers as human beings and being empathetic. It's at the core of every healthy customer relationship. Being empathetic at scale, though, is an entirely different proposition, and that's something we're really just at the very beginning of that journey.
A startling stat from a Pew Research poll saying that more than 80% of Americans don't trust companies or the government with their data. The concern is, as data continues to grow at an alarming rate, watchdog agencies won't be able to keep up. Mike, what's your take on this?
My take is that this is an astonishing number. Can you think of any business that would survive if 80% of their customers didn't trust them? But it also highlights the fact that most consumers don't feel they have any recourse over how their data is handled. That's all changing fast on a legislative level, but that needs to translate down to consumers and the brands they deal with.
The subject of rewards programs is on the mind of many consumers. 55% say that loyalty programs don't give us what we really want, but 48% say that they need to deliver a better customer experience. But Mike, it's interesting because on the heels of that last headline, we don't want companies using our data, but yet we want a better customer experience. So how is that possible?
This is about the gap that exists between what companies think they know about their customers and what customers really want. Another report recently came out and said that 86% of companies believe they understand their customers' needs, but only 35% of those same customers agree. That expectation gap is a huge opportunity for competitive advantage.
Today's roundtable delves deeper into this conundrum for companies. How do brands meet the demands of their customer as expectations rise? Talking with us today, we have Doty from Atlaas and Chris McGreal from Cordial. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. It seems that based on all of the studies we're reading is that the customer is almost as fickle as a teenager. We don't want our data out there, but yet we want a better CX. And Chris, this is your area of expertise at Cordial. How do you bridge what I'm perceiving as a disconnect?
The biggest challenge for brands today is it is a data problem. It's how do I get all of my customer data centralized? How do I remove the problem of it being locked up in silos? Once it is centralized, how can I activate it? How can I create experiences that are driven by those signals that the customer is sending to the brand? And I think that starts at an organizational level. It comes down to how do I align my people, my processes, and my platform. And I think what I've witnessed, especially as you get into bigger enterprise brands, is there can be some contention and or competition even across departments with competing objectives, competing budgets. That could be your CRM organization, your product organization, loyalty, merchandising. You've got all of these different owners, and you've got all of these people who are collecting data in different areas with different tools. How does the marketing organization get access to all of that in a centralized place to really unlock the value that's really, in a lot of cases, totally locked up in that data?
So that happens to be a topic that I know Atlaas talks an awful lot about, is the siloing of not just the data, but the objectives, and then trying to align all those efforts into, at one point, I think it was an ideal to have everybody marching in lockstep, but is that really even real? Maybe you could just have them marching toward the right point on the horizon.
What we talk a lot about at Atlaas is the fact that while customer experience as a discipline isn't new, even data-driven marketing isn't new, but the problem most brands face, regardless of industry, is that each of their customer-facing functions is operating under, even if it's a single metric, right? Maybe the CX team has NPS, maybe the call center has CSAT, maybe marketing has something else, right? Those metrics can lead those pieces of the organization in disparate ways. They're not meeting on a common goal. They're not aligned with their customers, is how we put it at Atlas.
So, Chris, as you explain that further, it seems like it is a complicated problem. A lot of companies are resistant to change. So it seems like in order to solve this problem, there needs to be some wholesale changes into a company's infrastructure. Am I hearing that right?
I think there needs to be a wholesale change in terms of a shared objective and a collaborative, at least at a collaborative level, aligning on the prioritization of the customer experience, and everybody's contributing to that outcome. From Cordial's perspective, as a vendor, partner, and software, we're not going to necessarily be able to affect those kinds of changes. So what we have to focus on is how can we build tools that allow for Cordial to kind of act as a sort of the confluence of those objectives in the sense of, we have opened up our platform from a data portability perspective to allow the ingestion of data from each of those different organizations, pull that data out of their silos. Let's normalize that. Let's put it in a single place so that the marketing team can activate it. Ideally, everybody's just feeding data into a platform like Cordial directly. But if that's not the case, we can actually port that data in. We don't necessarily aim to be the single source of truth for the data. We want to be a consolidation and an activation platform so we can listen to all of those signals in as real time as possible in order to make that valuable for the marketing team to act in an agile fashion to manage their programs.
We talk a lot about trying to create engagement at scale and trying to create empathy at scale. And it's always seems to be the at scale phrase that trips companies up, because let's face it, it's way easier to do that when you're dealing with your customers one-on-one. But when you've got a couple 100,000 or more, or 1 million or more, managing that at a human level becomes really difficult. So, and if I heard, I'm going to paraphrase and probably butcher this, but if I heard correctly, it seems like Cordial's developed technology that can assemble disparate data sets to help create those kinds of engagements at some sort of scale.
Correct. That's our objective. So going back to the data platform, our data platform, we can kind of think of it as our foundation. And that's really the customer profile, a single customer profile that has all of the data points with respect to different channels, whether that's your mobile interaction, your app interaction, or your website, past purchase, order history, et cetera, putting all of that into a single view of the customer. And then the question of scale comes down to how do I organize and automate my touch points within the customer lifecycle? And then how do I speak to each person individually? How do I speak to each customer individually within those programs? And that comes down to, for us, the power of programmatic personalization. So I think there's also a shift where brands need to kind of evolve from thinking about a static marketing calendar and or a linear journey that is built, and move towards something that's a little bit more programmatic, where you're listening to real-time signals and you've got kind of these autonomous communication streams that get stood up, triggered, and sent based on signals you're actually observing in real time. There's a transition from a purely audience-based targeting approach to campaigns that are listening for signals that put people into a certain position in the customer lifecycle. Once people qualify for a message, you need to, in order to really create a one-to-one personalized experience, we offer a personalization engine that really has full access to all of that data that I alluded to earlier. And we can determine exactly what content should be printed for that customer at that moment in time, and then delivered through the correct channel.
Carl, in the past, you talk a lot about companies needing to listen to the customer. Do you find that more and more companies are are wanting to do that, or are they just giving lip service to it because they understand that that's the trend right now? What's been your experience in terms of the companies that you've dealt with in terms of their receptivity to embrace some of the things that Chris has been talking about?
The direct answer is yes. I think most companies, if not all of them, I don't think there's a marketer on the planet really that doesn't want to get closer to their customer, doesn't want to deliver better customer experiences, doesn't want to be more personalized. I think what's often missed is what I refer to as context. There's customer context and there's business context, right? And exactly what Chris is talking about here, picking up on real-time cues or indicators in the moment of need, is recognizing the customer's context in that moment and delivering whatever piece of information or experience is needed in that particular moment. But there's also a business context, which I think people miss. And that is recognizing that, whether if you're delivering financial services versus selling toothpaste, being personalized, having deeper engagement means very different things in those kinds of contexts, right? So that's a long-winded way of me saying I think marketers treat it all as this spread it like peanut butter approach. And if I have the right data and the right technology, we can be personalized. And it's a bit deeper than that, obviously.
It goes back to alignment with customer values and with customer sentiment and expectations, which, as we all seem to be nodding in agreement with, is no easy task. But I think platforms like Cordial's and others that have figured out ways to assemble disparate data sets are going a long way to get us there.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Aligning with what customers expect in that moment of need is paramount, and recognizing the fact that expectation might change from moment to moment.
Isn't that the challenge, though? Because those expectations are changing from moment to moment. Chris, is that essentially what software can do? Stay ahead of those trends to make sure that the company and your clients are one step ahead of those shifts?
Yeah, and that exactly, and that's where real time comes into play. So the lower latency, in terms of how quickly your platform can ingest that data, the faster you can respond to and or personalize or change the context of your messaging to respond to any signals that are coming in, whether it's sentiment that's being expressed with your customer service organization. It could be reviews that customer is leaving on your site with respect to your services or your product, or it could be last minute browse behavior that a customer is exhibiting on your site. All of that can kind of inform the tone and the focus of the message that's being delivered now based on what just happened.
Well, that brings me back to the original question. So how do you get that information, but also not be invasive? Like I said, we want our data protected, but that's information that a company needs in order to deliver the things that you and Carl are talking about. Am I correct?
It is. And, Cordial works expressly with first-party data. And there's a subtlety there. And we call that the art and the science. The art is the subtle tact that's the skill and the talent that's brought to the program by the marketing organization. And then the science is what Cordial brings, is having the right tools to activate that. And also not only activate it, but to observe, measure, and then optimize. So our users often will bring many hypotheses to the table on what is the right subtlety in terms of the communication. And we give them the tools to, in real time, run optimizations where they can test different hypotheses against each other in real time. And the system will self-optimize based on which ones perform the best at scale.
No, I'll add something to this. I think that's a really important point, that there's an art as well as a science to doing this correctly as well. And you have to humanize these touch points as well, and recognize the fact that there's a tension between, especially today, data privacy and the technological capabilities that we have as marketers to be personalized. And there's a fine line between adding a lot of value to that customer in the moment and being really creepy to that customer in the moment or maybe in the next moment. And that's not the fault of technology. That's the fault of the application of that technology on the part of the marketers who are operating with it.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting discussion going forward, I think, is that, we can now do so much. We go so far into personalization, understanding what our clients, our customers are all about, their personal habits. And I know that, if the consuming public, especially the American consuming public, had any notion of how much data was available on them personally out there, they'd probably be infuriated. So it seems to me like the challenge of the next phase of this, whatever you want to call it, is how to apply restraint sensibly, because we can do a lot more damage than good if you're not careful.
I totally agree. And I would also add that I think consumer attitudes about that vary widely. I've spoken to many consumers of all ages that they don't care. They just assume that everybody's got their data and there's nothing they can do about it. And then, of course, there are others who are more inclined to be private people, and they want government to step in and put some restrictions on advertisers and marketers. So we've got a long road ahead of us.
In the words of Nigel, it's a fine line between clever and stupid. You guys being the clever, me being the stupid. I want to thank you. If you haven't seen Spinal Tap, Google it, kids. Carl Doty, Chris McGreal, thank you both so much for joining us.
I'm going to turn this one up to 11, Rafer, when I watch it.